Welcome to Menopause and Miracles, the podcast where midlife women come to embrace change, reclaim their voice, and create a next chapter that they genuinely love. I'm Suzanne, your host and your midlife wingwoman, helping women rebuild trust, reconnect with who they are, and navigate midlife with more clarity, confidence, and authenticity. And today's conversation is for every woman who's ever wondered, what do I want my life to look like now? We're talking about money, relationships, remarriage, and the importance of building a life that's aligned with your values. Because in midlife, financial planning isn't just about protecting your future, it's about creating the freedom to live it on your own terms. This is Episode 55, His, Hers, and Ours, Navigating Money in Midlife Relationships. My guest today is Leah Hadley. Leah is a certified divorce financial analyst, accredited financial counselor, and founder of Intentional Wealth Partners and Intentional Divorce Solutions. She recently released her book, Intentional Money, which you can find on Amazon in March of this year. And she also facilitates a membership program called the Empowered Sisterhood, which is on a mission to break down the barriers we have around talking about money and improving financial literacy. Lay's approach with finances starts not with budgets, but with values. She asks questions like, who are you now? What actually matters? The questions we're continually or starting to ask ourselves in midlife. Whether you're navigating a remarriage or trying to decide what combining finances should look like this time around, Leah is here to help us answer some of those questions. Welcome, Leah. So glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, and I know that our listeners are going to be super excited to talk about two key things that could either bring faith or fear into midlife, right? Like, what do I do now? And I always talk about getting help here, getting support. Those are two important things to do, is to ask and surround yourself with a community that can help out. And tell us kind of where you are on the midlife meter.
I am smack in the middle of midlife. I am in my mid 40s and I've lost both my parents. Unfortunately, I lost my mom last year. But I'm also in that time of transition with my kids growing up. My oldest just finished his first year of college. But my youngest is still home. And we have him for still have high school left. So I have three teenagers.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's a lot, right? It just you're entering into midlife, and I think that's the thing that it's not one thing at one, it's just a lot of new things to navigate. And how would you say that you best have navigated some of that for yourself?
Well, a couple of years ago, I would have told you that my mom was absolutely my rock and,
Mm,
facing caring for her toward the end of her life and then losing her and, the aftermath of all of that has honestly changed me in ways that I never could have imagined, Suzanne. It's really forced me to be like, you know what? You got to figure this out. Like it's, you can't rely on
yeah.
mom anymore. Right.
Mm,
And so really learning how to stand up on my own and acknowledge like, hey, I'm in control here. I get to make the decisions and
mm,
and I get to, right? Because so often a lot of these decisions are hard decisions and it feels like, ugh, I have to or I have to look at this and I'm struggling with this. But I think, when you go through really challenging times in your life, you recognize the gratitude in just being present and even if it's a tough decision, being very grateful for the moment.
yeah, that it's so well said, so beautifully said, in a sense that, wow, I really think that could even be another episode in how no matter if your mom was an active part of your life or an active presence, there is that sense of security that you have the parent there. And then when they're gone, it's like, oh, really having to face yourself in a
Yeah,
sense. Yeah. And trust yourself. Trust
absolutely.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, many women, right now, we're going to talk a little bit about remarriage and reinvention. Many women enter midlife after divorce, widowhood, long term relationships. And what do you see women getting right about remarriage today, maybe more than prior generations?
I think the biggest thing, and for anybody who has had the challenge of going through a big breakup or a divorce or losing maybe a partner who took responsibility for the finances, a lot of women in midlife have reason to suddenly wake up and realize, hey, I really need to figure out my money, right? Retirement is starting to approach. A lot of folks are just like I am figuring out, like, aging parents and children who are growing up and kind of being in that sandwich space of a lot of people demanding a lot from you, right, during that time. And so I think a lot of women do find that it's a time in their life where it's important to kind of go in eyes wide open as far as what the finances look like. The other big thing is, Suzanne, the first time people get married, a lot of people don't necessarily fully understand what that legal contract is that they're entering into, right? But once they've gone through a divorce and they've really had to understand what was it that they agreed upon in entering that marriage, they just have a lot more awareness going into a second marriage, and kind of thinking about how do I avoid some of the mistakes I may have made in the past.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and then you just answered. I mean, how should women think differently about going in the second time? And like you said, I mean, with maturity, age, wisdom, and the wisdom of having gone through, I mean, I'm sure there's, that gain wisdom of what I don't want to do this time around. What conversation should every couple have before combining lives again?
It's really important for people to have a very complete financial picture before entering into a life together, whatever that looks like for you, right? And so having real clarity about what your current financial situation is, but also what you want for your life, what matters to
Mm,
you, what kind of legacy you want to leave, right? A lot of times when I'm working with people who are married for a second time or a third time, a lot of the financial conflict has to do with undefined boundaries around their family members, right? So, like supporting
mm,
adult children that may not be your partner's adult children, that can create a lot of conflict if you haven't set clear parameters around what that looks like and what you're both comfortable with. And so it's a different conversation for a lot of people when they first get married the first time. A lot of people aren't entering into that relationship with significant assets or income. A lot of times people are younger when they're entering into that. Not all the time. Some people are entering in with wealth, but for the most part, most people have not really established themselves when they are entering into that first marriage. Later in life, it's a very different picture. There are different people in your life who may or may not be depending on you. Your income, you may be looking at potential inheritance, all kinds of different factors that need to be considered. And none of this has to create conflict. But when we don't talk about these things, we don't
right.
have clarity around them, they can very easily create conflict.
Yeah, and I love that. I would hope that we, with the wisdom or the more that we've gained over the years in midlife, that there would be a pause. But I do feel that if there isn't the education or the action to um, the practice of having those conversations, I feel that people could just go into the marriage the same way they went the first time. So, any, I mean, the only thing that the question is common financial mistakes couples make when they remarry, and I think you mentioned one big one is the communication about it, not waiting till after the fact to say, "Oh, hey," and learn things that are like maybe that's a red flag that you don't want to people have pensions, retirement, property, some of those things. You would hope there'd be a pause, but what do you see in working with couples or women, particularly that they are still hesitating on?
Well, it's a big one is just really honestly having conversations. And that is why such a big component of our Empowered Sisterhood membership program is literally just let's talk about money. Let's
Mhm,
create space that's safe, that allows you to just practice having these conversations. Because a lot of the women that we work with, Suzanne, and the reason why I was inspired to create the program will wait years before they reach out because they feel like they should have done this or they should know that or whatever the should is at the moment, right? But the program is really designed to break down those barriers and allow us to have that fluid conversation. The more we're talking about money, the more comfortable we're going to get talking about money. The more we can get our questions answered, the more we find out that other people have the same questions that we have. But it is definitely by far one of the biggest mistakes. And you're exactly right, Suzanne. We see it all the time where somebody had a negative financial experience in their first marriage and they still didn't own their finances when that breakup happened, and when they get remarried and they sort of delegate that to their partner
mhm,
again, they find themselves in the same situation.
yeah,
And so it's very, very common. So if you're listening and you're in that situation, know that it's common and that it's something that can be addressed whether you're, already married or you're dating in a relationship, right? There's always an opportunity to come to create space to have these conversations. And I acknowledge that initially they may feel very uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. It's not something that we're used to talking about. And so I really encourage people to open up very gently and just say something to your partner like, what was your experience like growing up with around money? What did your
mhm,
parents say? What did your family talk about or not talk about? Those conversations will share a lot, teach you a lot about where that person is coming from, but it
right.
doesn't feel as personal as how much debt do you have, right? What's your income? How much are you spending on vacations? Like, those
We
conversations
wanna know
may
the
not.
backstory first. We wanna know the backstory. And parents in our environment, we're influenced by those things. And I was listening to your podcast, and what makes me think about women specifically is just how I know my mom, for example, the relationship I saw was that my mom had to ask my dad for money because
Sure.
she was at a stay-home mom. And so, um, just, that kind of a male figure had more power on the money or knowledge, and that a female did not. And so for you, how does financial transparency look like in a mature relationship? As far as the communication style, like you said, talking. I love that you're just focused of having the conversations early. But
Mhm.
once you get to a place of that transparency, what are some healthy couples doing? Maybe that would be a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I love money dates. I think having a system where you are scheduling a regular money date, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly, everybody's financial situation is different, whatever that looks like for you and your partner, but making sure that you have set aside dedicated time to have conversations about money. And this is really, really important, Suzanne. In order for these money dates to be successful, it is imperative that you are not creating a space of judgment. This is a space of open communication. It's a space to celebrate wins and it's a space to problem solve jointly, collaboratively together, right? Keep in mind that the idea is for you guys to be working toward common goals. And in order to be working toward common goals, you got to know what those goals are. If you haven't had the conversation, you may think, hey, I'm planning for a retirement at 65 that involves international travel and a life of very, free life. And your partner may be thinking, hey, I want, to move. I want to spend my time gardening. I don't really want to leave the home. That's going to be a very different planning
Very different.
experience. Yeah, absolutely. And I will be honest and tell you, in doing retirement planning for all these years, I have had plenty of couples that are that extreme,
Mm,
and haven't had these conversations. And so the more that we can create space to just say, hey, let's get on the same page and make sure we're working toward the same things. A lot of times, just having those common goals and open conversation that actually can relieve a lot of the conflict that gets created
right.
by just having this constant tension and not talking about things.
Yeah, and seeing where the similarities are instead of the differences, where are we aligned? And it's okay to have differences. It's okay for someone to want to travel. And I know a friend, married couple, she loves travel. He does not like leaving the US. So, they work around that. And I don't know if at the start of the podcast here, did you highlight that you were also remarried because you have that own personal experience of yours?
Yeah, so I was married for 10 years the first time, and then I did go through my own divorce and I remarried. My husband and I have been together now for this is our 9-year anniversary this week.
Oh,
Thank
congratulations.
you.
Yeah, and so that's why I just wanna highlight that for our listeners and make sure that I didn't miss that because of the work that you do both around divorce and the financial and remarriage, and, you get it from a very personal level, and I think that's always a value with someone that I work with. It's like if someone gets me, like they've been there, they know what I'm going through on a personal level, so well, one midlife truth that they didn't warn you about is that the second marriage often isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone who can honor the life you've already built. So, spending tells a story. And what do you see in couples as far as the values when it comes to putting together a budget and spending? And what are some of the big things that you see as challenges there?
The biggest one is most people don't operate off a budget. The vast majority of people out there don't operate off a budget. And the vast majority of people, in all honesty, when you say the word budget, it can be a little triggering. I think most people look at as a budget as like this awful restrictive diet that it like, excludes bread or like takeout if you want to have like the analogy, whatever. But here's the thing, right? When we get clear, when we start talking about these things early on, then we can really look at how are we allocating our resources. That's what a budget is, right? It's a plan for the money that's coming in. Where do we want to allocate it? Are we investing in our future? Are we creating stability and safety through an emergency fund? Are we eliminating high interest rate debt because it's really weighing us down and it's holding us back, right? Where is our focus? And what does day to day look like? Really, what matters to us? What's important? For some people, and I mentioned this before because I see it all the time, there's a tremendous amount of conflict in families around how people support their adult children. What does that look like?
Mm,
What level of support? Look, whether you're married or you're divorced or you're remarried, those conversations, those decisions have to be made regardless. Or for a lot of people, unfortunately, they're supporting their adult children to the level of making it so they are not getting ready for their own retirement,
mhm,
right? They're putting
right,
themselves in a precarious financial situation.
right,
And so it's really important that you're setting boundaries together. What does this look like for our family? And, that might mean that this month we are prioritizing something that has come up that's really important to our family. That means that we're going to spend a little bit less on something else, but that doesn't mean it's a forever conversation, right? I think that's part of, people get stuck and frustrated around budgeting because they think it's forever. Whatever we're looking at is forever. If people are struggling to get out of debt, we're going to be in debt forever, right?
right,
But the whole purpose is to create a plan to get from where you are to where you want to be. That's all it is, right? And
yep,
so when we really reframe it that way, then we can have honest conversations about, well, what's really holding us back? But sometimes the things that are holding us back are commitments that we made to people that we absolutely care about. And when we think about it from a values perspective, this can feel like a lot of tension. Very
mm,
common example for people in midlife. A lot of people in midlife have teenagers. And for a lot of people who have teenagers, they might find themselves struggling with things like extracurricular activities and travel expenses, travel teams, things like that. Can't tell you how many families I've worked with over the years who've really struggled to keep up with the cost when their kids
right,
are invested in these activities. They've been doing them for years. They want to make sure that they can continue to do them, right? We have to be honest about what we
right,
are choosing to invest in for our kids and what we're giving up, right? There's always an opportunity cost. And so if we're deciding, hey, the most important thing to me is that I am supporting my kids in this activity, then maybe I'm going to plan to work a little longer and I'm not going to retire when I said I was, right? That's the conversation that becomes so important. open about these things so that way they don't create conflict. But we want to be realistic. And I think that budgeting conversation and process is incredibly valuable in looking at not just what's really important to us or what have we already committed to, but how can we really plan for our future in a meaningful way.
Yeah, maybe I mean, you kept referencing the word plan. Maybe if we just call it what's our plan instead of the word budget. Budget has a negative effect on people or they run away from it. But it's like you said, having a plan where both people are actually talking about it. And what kept coming across for me is just it's really communication. It's really just having that open communication and dialogue and making sure two people are on the same page or the whole family's on the same page. Um, how can a woman identify whether her money is truly aligned with her, whether she's single or whether she's in a marriage? How can women, because, women's identity around money has been a different journey than men's journey around money. And so, kind of getting their power back, getting their own identity around it. How would you say what are some tips that you give to women on how to align with that?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, like if you are somebody who has struggled with your relationship with money, if you're listening now, I want to just encourage you to recognize how quickly, how far women have come in such a short period of time when we look back at history, right? It wasn't until the 1980s, the late 80s, mind you, that a woman could sign her own business loan. That was in
Mhm.
the late 80s, okay? And so let's be very clear. Yes, we're sitting here in 2026 now, but that if we look at that kind of period of time, we have come a very long way. If we look at even the SpaceX IPO, here we have a woman who's president of one of the largest public companies in the world, right? This is amazing, the amount of progress that we've made in such a short period of time. But I think that also creates a lot of internal tension and complexity for women because here we feel like, hey, we have the opportunity. Now we need to kind of be on equal footing. But I think we also have to be very realistic. Suzanne, just like you shared earlier, many of us were raised in houses where it was the man who took responsibility for the finances and it was the woman who asked for resources when
Yeah.
needed, right? Very, very common situation. Normal, just kind of like what the standard life looked like at that time,
Right.
right? So we always want to look at and be realistic about what have our own experiences been witnessing how people interact with money, right? And give yourself grace because so many women give themselves such a hard time and it may not even be themselves doing it. They may have
Right.
heard messaging over the years of you're bad with money, you can't do that, things like that. All kinds of messaging that people hear that people internalize, right? I always encourage people to really look at where they're feeling stuck and what is the tiniest, smallest little step that we can take to move the needle forward to just start to build a little bit of momentum. So, whether that is, we have one of the members of our Empowered Sisterhood community who's really, really struggled with budgeting and looking at her numbers on a regular basis. This is something that's just been, she's a perfectionist and she just gives herself a very, very hard time about everything not lining up, right? And so we really worked hard on how can we limit the way that you are working within this system and celebrate every moment of
Yeah.
the positive thoughts that we want you to have, right? But that's what it starts with is like recognizing what's going on beneath the surface and
Yeah.
really starting to pull that out so we can acknowledge where we need to make some shifts. And we are all about celebrating every single move forward.
No, I love that because, as you mentioned, the identity that we feel that we hold about money as women may not even be ours.
That's right.
And so that's why I love you help women reevaluate their relationship. And some of that, sometimes it's just the right word, right? Like budget might be a negative thing. But how I saw modeled, it could give me the impression I'm not good with money because
Right.
I did not get the opportunity to see my mother be good with money. I saw my dad, but as a woman, Where do I get those examples? And we're in a time where there are so many resources like yourself. We definitely live in a time. And I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge for women to embrace getting help for themselves when it comes to owning their financial power, their financial literacy?
It's about having conversations about money. Women don't talk about money. Men talk about money all the time. Men talk about their investments. Men talk about their businesses. Women just don't talk about money in the same way. And that is why I think what we're creating in the Empowered Sisterhood is so critical to
Yeah.
really. I don't think we can close the wage gap until we will have open
Right.
conversations about money. I truly believe that. And so the more that you can get comfortable owning whatever story you're bringing to the table doesn't mean it doesn't have to be the end of your story, right? We're all bringing something. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being in midlife. Honestly, I remember being younger and looking and thinking like slowing down. And like I had a very different visual about what this stage of my life would look like. But what I'm finding is deeper connections with people, right? Because that's the beauty of midlife is you have lived a lot of life. You do have a lot of wisdom to bring to the table. And we no longer need to accept whatever these messages are that we have in the background, but we can start to bring them to the light, bring them and start having conversations about them. Then we can really break down the barriers.
I love that. I love that's such an aha for me because I have noticed that women do not talk about their money or their purchases as openly as you shared that men do. And I think what an empowering opportunity to have those conversations and a community like yours or others. There's communities where if you don't feel comfortable to go at this alone, women, I think, love to have community. That's
Exactly.
what you have and that's what's out there. So just I hope that there's women listening that understand like there are places where you can just embrace having conversations just to start with without probably having to do anything else, to just get comfortable talking about money. And tell me a little bit, I didn't have this as an avenue to go down, but I did want to know what inspired you for your book as far as who was your main audience and what were you thinking of when you wrote it?
That book shared so much of my own story, honestly. I felt a tremendous amount of pressure when I was younger to keep up with the Joneses, right?
Mm.
I went to a very expensive liberal arts school for college, and I did not come from a family of means. I was raised by a single mom. I had a wonderful financial aid package, which I am tremendously grateful for. But being in that environment was kind of a unique experience for me because I was surrounded by people who were of a very different economic status than what I had come from. And so I racked up debt when I was in college. I had student loans and then I
Mhm.
racked up credit card debt just trying to enjoy life with friends and, go to
Mhm.
the dinner or whatever was happening. And it just felt like there was never enough. And I will say it wasn't always a negative thing because the fact that I was struggling with my student loan debt and I had high interest rate credit card really was a huge incentive to make sure that I made sure I was increasing my income in order to be able to get out of the situation that I had created. But that said, it didn't have to be that way, right? It didn't have to be this high anxiety. How do I, kind of manage? So a lot of it was from my own story, but also working with so many women over the years who are going through life transitions and feeling so much pressure from so many different angles of how
Mm.
to make decisions, what needs to happen, this, that, and the other. And so often these women that I'm working with, especially those who are coming out of a very long-term marriage and going through a divorce, are sitting there really getting to know themselves again because we compromise so much
Mm.
in marriage to, try to make the relationship work and all of that, right? And we give so much to our families and to our children that a lot of times we lose sight of who we are and what matters to us. And then when we look at the life that we've created, the financial structure, the fixed expenses, they might not really reflect what is meaningful, right? I worked with a
Right.
woman who um she was saying, Leah, you know, we haven't tithed the church like since the very early years of our marriage. And this is something that just has always, always really, really bothered me. Is there any way, as we're setting up this financial plan for me post divorce, that we can really prioritize making sure that I'm tithing? Absolutely. Yes, if that's what's important to you, that might
Mm,
mean we need to make some other changes, from a cash flow perspective, might mean some adjustments. But if that's what matters to you, that's your priority. Yes, let's put that at the very top, line item. And that is literally when I do budgeting with people is I really look at, okay, what's income? But then we focus on what are the top priorities. So if you don't have an emergency fund and we're saving for security and stability, that's going to be the most important thing. It's not like last after we've spent all the
right.
money for the month, right? It's first. It's, that concept of paying yourself first. But the idea being that, hey, what is most important to me? I'm going to prioritize first and foremost.
Well, and you give so many great examples. I mean, I know we have a limited time because there's so many questions going through my head to ask. What's one thing working with all of these women, seeing where they are, especially in midlife, what's one thing that you wish every woman, you know, over 50 understood about money? That maybe it's like, oh, they're not getting it, or I wish they'd get this. And you have to obviously working with them wait, but what do you see that you'd really want them to understand?
So most women come to start working with me when they're going through a major life transition. It may be a career transition, it may be loss of a loved one, it may be a divorce. It's something that for most part I tend to work with people when their confidence is feeling a
Mm,
little bit shaken. And so when people's confidence is shaken, especially if they're newer to investing or being responsible for investment decisions, they tend to be very, very conservative in those decisions. And I would say, I think there's not enough conversation about opportunity cost. And when you decide to invest more conservatively or you try to get a better return, what does that actually mean for you and for your life? Time is the most valuable asset that you have
mm.
when it comes to building wealth. So the sooner you can do it and you can do it in a way that you're really taking a stand and going all in, the better results you're going to get. Now, obviously, all investing involves risk, and we always know that. But a lot of times I do find that people are entering into the space later in life very, very conservative. They started learning maybe about investing earlier in life and just following the market. Because a lot of times I find even 3, 4, 5 years after we've been working together, people get more comfortable. They get more
Mhm.
confidence or willing to take more risk and we can get better returns. But I would love to see that happen earlier on. And so I think that building that confidence and just trusting yourself and the professionals that you're working with to make those
Yeah.
decisions, you'll find you'll build wealth much faster.
Yeah, it just sounds like the message I got is just get started. Don't wait. Time is, especially in midlife, that's the one thing I value my time. Realize how much more precious it is than when I was in my 20s and I could just throw it around. I could, there was plenty of it to go around, but no, all wise things. And so just protecting having women protect themselves while building something new. What are some ways that women in midlife can prioritize, shift the way that they think about financial planning? So let's say, like you said, it was interesting to me that women are coming to you, but it just also made me think of it. It must be the gifts that you offer because you yourself have your personal experience that women come to you in major transitions, losing a parent, loved one, divorce. Um, so how do you initially get them to shift their mindset around, financial planning as a way of life for them versus like, dipping their toe in and getting right back out.
This is a tough one. Honestly, it is. Now, I always start when we do financial planning for people, we always start by getting to know the person. I'm not actually interested in the numbers initially. We'll get there, but I always focus on who you are as an individual. And I think part of just having those conversations allows us to build rapport, to create safe space, to feel like we can start to approach the numbers in a meaningful way. A lot of times, if numbers are something that triggers you, and you haven't done the work to create the space for yourself to feel safe in looking at those numbers, then when the numbers come up, you're not getting any information from there anyway, right? You're kind of like glazing over
Checked
or
out.
just yeah, zoning out, whatever that may be, right? And so I think it is really important to acknowledge wherever you are. And that's a lot of what we do is where are you now? What's coming up for you? What are your experiences that are informing the way that we're interacting around these financial planning conversations, right? Like, let's get clear about that. A lot of times people don't even notice what might be coming up for them until we start to have these conversations, right? Because it's all playing in the background, and
Right.
maybe not coming to the surface. And so the more that we can start to recognize these things and then look at them and say, hey, is this serving me? Is this helping me get to my goal? Or is this holding me back? And maybe I need to look at things a little bit differently. But really getting beneath the surface is so important. So that way we can, come at it with a regulated nervous system and feel like we're
Right.
really engaged in the conversation we're trying to have.
And I love a regulated nervous system. Definitely do. And that's just, it, I mean, that's if Leah knows what that is, know that that should be a sign for women in midlife, an attractive sign. I think when you were talking about that, I love that because even sometimes we don't even know where we are, where we've been. We're still operating out of those old messages, signs, and it's like, who am I as this adult woman right now? What's important to me? Because we're, again, outsourcing a lot of who we are, giving, giving, giving. And midlife is that point to go, oh, who am I? What's important to me? And what does financial self trust look like? And I think just having this conversation with you, I hope our listeners I love that looks like you build that self trust and you help women walk through that. And what are some ahas that you see when you're working with women that just light you up? I can imagine they're coming from these different places and some of it, pain, some of it suffering, some of it, like you said, those voices, doubt. What are some ahas that you see with your women clients?
So I had a client who it's just so fascinating to hear why people do or don't do what they do, right? So I was working with a woman, she was recently divorced, single mom, had a young baby, and she had been in her career for maybe 15 years at that point, but she wasn't educated for the career that she was in. She had just kind of started, I don't remember if it was like as an assistant or whatever, she had kind of started and worked her way up through the company. And we started working together. I looked at the kind of work that she did and what her compensation was like. I said to her, like, you are significantly underpaid. And she
Mm,
explained to me that she was not as valuable an employee because she wasn't
mm,
educated for the role. She had built the skills in the role. And I said, I'm not going to agree with you on this. And I'm curious if you did a little bit of research in your industry and found out what compensation looks like for the role that you're in based on your years of experience, what would feel like a fair compensation based on where the market is. Suzanne, this was a woman who was making about $80,000 a year. She was able to increase her compensation by 50%. She was a
wow.
single mom with a young baby. That additional money was everything for her. I mean,
Mm,
it made such a huge difference. And I don't know how long it would have taken her if she and I hadn't had that conversation,
mhm,
or if she ever would have gotten to a place of being more fairly compensated, because she, in her mind, felt like she was not worthy of asking for more, even though she was absolutely doing the job and creating the value that she should be compensated at. And I would love to say this is a one off. It's not. This is a
mm-mm.
story that I've heard over and over in the years, but the magnitude of the change was a huge aha for me, because this was a life changing example for her.
Right. Yeah, wow. I mean, that's amazing. Gosh, what a beautiful story. And I myself, my background is in talent acquisition and recruiting. And so, my corporate career, I definitely know that well as far as the wage gap or how they get around trying to balance that out, but it's still a work in progress. What are some protections that every woman should put in place regardless of their relationship status? Is there any certain protections that they should do financially or otherwise?
Yeah, one of the most important things that you can do for yourself is make sure you're clear on your financial situation. Know where your income is coming from, know when it's coming in and how you're receiving it, know where it's going, what you have already committed to, what your expenses look like, what's fixed, what's variable, where you have kind of levers in your spending plan if you need to make an adjustment. I often share my own personal story. We adopted our three children out of foster care. So we went from being parents of no children to parents of three children overnight. You can imagine what that does to a budget. And
Whoa.
as a
I would
financial
say, whoa.
professional, yeah, as a financial professional, I do maintain a budget.
That's
And
good.
so, yeah, but it was really helpful to have that document, right? In be able to know what can I adjust, right? I don't know how we would have gotten through that transition if I didn't have that to lean on to say, okay, now all of a sudden we're spending three times as much on food and clothing and utilities and all of these things, right?
Wow.
But that was so valuable for me. And that's a beautiful example, right? I was able to make that decision with my ex-husband and choose to go that route and make this change in our life. Unfortunately, a lot of people have things happen in their lives that are completely out of their control, but they
Mhm.
still need to make those adjustments on a dime, right? To be able to really protect your financial situation, you have to know your numbers. Even if you might not be the one who handles the day to day finances, it's still critical to make sure that you know your numbers inside and out, right? You
Well,
also want to know, go ahead.
it was just making me think of how dedicated people are to counting their calories. They should be able to know their numbers for their finances, right?
That's right. That's right.
People.
That's right.
Okay.
Um, but then it's also important from a protection standpoint that you really are protecting what needs to be protected with insurance, right? So many people come out of a divorce situation as an example where there's a huge change in the overall structure of their lives and they decide, you know what? Health insurance is a really big expense that I can't afford right now. Well, as a financial
Mhm.
professional, I'm usually on the side of arguing one of those things that you can't afford not to have, right? Because we look and see what is the risk. We're always looking at where's the risk, right? And so making sure you understand what kind of insurance do you really need to have in place to truly protect yourself, right? If you are relying on a former spouse for income, what happens if they lose their job? What happens if
Mhm.
they become disabled? What happens if they pass away, right? Making
Yes.
sure that we understand not just what our numbers are, but where the risks are. And there are products designed to protect some of those risks. And for a lot of people, especially if you might be in a situation where you might be struggling with cash flow a little bit, maybe money's tighter, insurance is even more important when money is
Mhm.
tighter. And so making sure that you understand those protections. And then, certainly, last but not least, making sure that you really have thought through estate planning. That is really critical. And a lot of times, people entering into a second marriage don't want to go in and have the conversation about a prenuptial agreement. A lot of times, people think, well, if I'm talking about a prenuptial agreement, I'm preparing for divorce. No, no, no. Let's get that out of your head completely. When we're talking about second marriages and we're talking about a prenuptial agreement, that's an important piece of your estate plan. Okay. So
Mhm.
what that is documenting is what you're bringing into the marriage and how that's going to be handled if that marriage ends, right? And so for some people who may have had a family with their first partner, they may want a lot of their assets to go to their adult children, maybe not as much to go to their new spouse, right? Or, whatever that division looks like, that's entirely up to you. But the point is to make sure that you've thought through and have the legal documentation in place in order to make sure that your wishes are actually followed through upon.
Yeah, and it just reminds me again, like the word budget. I don't know if some of these things are scary words. It's just having a plan of some sorts. And the plan could be just in the way you described, you talk with a variety of women and a variety of clients. It's just you could call it whatever you want to make it comfortable. You could, take the slow, what I like to say, the slow and scenic route, or you could, take the fast track there. But just make sure that have a plan of some sorts and you're getting help, because if this isn't your wheelhouse, there's plenty of resources out there. And I loved everything that you shared. Do you think women are really seeking in midlife financial security or seeking financial freedom?
I work with people in both cases for sure. There are a lot of women who have a tremendous amount of fear around money. A lot of people out there, and I'm sure some of your listeners that'll resonate with them. And I just want to encourage you if you are somebody who does have a lot of fear and you are really seeking safety and security, financial planning is so powerful and really
Mm,
illustrating for you exactly where you are. And I'm honest with people, Suzanne. I tell people, hey, you are in great shape. You're going to be just fine so long as we stick with these parameters. And I tell people, look, we're in a tough situation, and these are the things that need to be addressed. And I'm honest. And I think
yeah,
just having that information and having the knowledge and knowing where you're at is still valuable. I know one of
right,
our team members just always says, fear is just unanswered questions. Let's answer those questions so you can
right.
feel safety and security. But then there are folks who are really just looking for freedom. And I think that's such a beautiful space to be in because, the world is changing in a lot of different ways, but in one meaningful way, there's a lot of opportunity for independence, for autonomy, for freedom. And so, we work through the financial planning experience to illustrate for you again how you can really enjoy money so that you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I love that. It's just you really help people have the conversations with themselves. And that's the thing. I think if people are stuck in fear, they don't or maybe they didn't have conversations in their home. I know we didn't have like when you talked about couples getting together and having conversations, why is it so scary? Because maybe no one taught us how to do that. And so getting with someone like yourself just to know how to be versed in that and feel comfortable and let the fear kind of dissipate a little bit is such a blessing. Well, I'm going to go through some rapid questions here. And I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story with us. I want to stay on another hour or two, but we got to do podcast, listening capacities are probably only an hour. So maybe we'll do a part two. What do you think? Joint accounts, yes, no, or it depends?
It definitely depends.
Okay. Biggest money myth women believe.
That women are bad with money. Women are actually, there's research that shows women are better investors than men.
Love it. Woo
Mm.
woo. One financial conversation every couple should have this week.
If you are not talking openly about where your current financial situation is, have that conversation. Know what your assets are, what you own, what your liabilities are, what you owe, where your income's coming from, when it's coming in, and what expenses you have committed to.
And there's so many wild tools out there that you can get for free. I mean, outside of an Excel spreadsheet, there are tools to plug and play just for fun. If you need help with a conversation, what's more important, net worth or self worth?
Self worth, 100%.
Best investment women can make in midlife.
In themselves.
I
So
love
many
that.
women tell me it's too late for this, it's too late for that. No, it is not too late. You are bringing a wealth of experience to the table. Invest in yourself
I love that. And to complete this sentence, money becomes easier when,
when you're clear on your numbers.
love it, numbers, numbers, people, call it what you want. If you want to call it something different, if you need a color chart for your numbers, that's what I was thinking. If people are like, we could just call it a color, instead of a number. Well, let's see where listeners can best find you. They can go to your website, www.intentionalwealthpartners.com, and look for you there. You can listen to Leah's podcast, Intentional Divorce Solutions, on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And her book, Intentional Money, is found on Amazon, Google Books, or the Kindle store. And anything else in ways that people can best connect with you?
Well, over the next couple of weeks, we are hosting a mid-year reset. So if you had some
Nice.
lofty goals starting in January and you're not quite where you wanted to be sitting here in June, consider joining us on Substack. So for the next 3 weeks, I will be doing a live session on specific exercises you can do to kind of have a mid-year reset.
Oh, I love that. I'm definitely going to put that in the show notes. I think I may join myself because the
Fantastic.
time just goes. I'm like, how are we in? It's going to be July. What goals did I have? Are we, is it January? I mean, that's how it goes for me in midlife. But yes, that is very cool. Well, thank you again for your time, your wisdom. It was so great to share. And what I loved most about this conversation is how Leah brought the conversation back to identity that so many women in midlife are asking when they're asking, who am I now? What do I want next? She showed us that our financial decisions can be a reflection of those answers. I hope today's conversation helped you reframe what financial planning can be from something restrictive into something deeply empowering. Instead of asking, what should I do with my money? She encourages to ask, what kind of life am I trying to create? And that's a very different conversation. And I think one every midlife woman deserves to have. If this episode gave you a new insight into identity healing, self leadership, or what it truly means to manage money, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow so you don't miss what's next. New episodes drop every Monday, and you can also watch this conversation on YouTube. And if someone you know is looking for a little encouragement to have conversations around money, please be sure to share this episode with them and spread the love. I'm Suzanne, your midlife wingwoman. This is Menopause and Miracles. I will see you next Monday. Until then, take good care of yourself and bye for now.